Welcome back to GlobeTrotting. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I absolutely love examining the future of airlines. Not only do we get a great insight into the outlook of that respective company, but also the continuing degree of change that can be witnessed is definitely a sight to behold. From one year to the next, core focuses can pivot as airlines attempt to navigate the many struggles of being a carrier in our industry. Also, you've got to consider that in a very competitive market, the stakes are raised for established airlines like Virgin Atlantic. Maintaining market share and meeting customers' what can only be described as evolving needs and requirements is of paramount, with all the many complexities as well. With several focuses already, the next 10 years will be hugely important for Virgin Atlantic. Let me begin taking a look at their future with a bit of focus on the onboard product. The carrier is definitely, you could say, an exciting point in regards to its fleet renewal efforts, for it only has to remove A330ceos, which it has already announced it will be retiring, and this is the last old-gen aircraft. However, despite drafting in so many aircraft, they do have 787s which are still present, and while these are next-gen aircraft, they've been around for a while. There are some visible concerns that the cabin product is not only no longer up to the standards of competitors, but also probably not up to the standards within Virgin Atlantic, especially for incoming aircraft and that new era of flying that we've seen. Therefore, there has been a lot of talk ignited about the process of launching a retrofit, which would be costly, but most likely a very necessary move for the UK-based company if it does intend on keeping these 787s for the long haul. Sounds weird that I'm even questioning keeping the 787s for the long haul, but across 2024 and only up until recently, this was a pretty key talking point when looking at the future of the 787, as Virgin Atlantic continued to move forward with the A350-1000 and obviously recommitted to the A330neo. There were some that believed the place of the 787 would no longer be required. We now know the company has extended the lease of these units, but 3 will be axed. So looking ahead, a cabin refinement, you'd argue, would likely be on the cards if the airline believes this to be a worthy investment. And obviously, if they proceed with a cabin refurbishment, well, it will mean that the 787s will stick around for quite some time to truly make that investment worthwhile. In the coming years, there is a great importance on the fleet from a standpoint of just being aircraft, not focusing on the cabin. As part of those continued transformation efforts, Virgin recently committed to additional A330neos, as early ago as the recent Farnborough Air Show. This will eventually be its largest flying fleet type once fully delivered and will form an integral part of future flying as a wide-body. Airbus will really reign supreme within the fleet, as it has done for some time, but certainly will be emphasised when all aircraft are formally delivered. While the 787 will play an important role, like I touched on, there is still some skepticism around its real long-term future. The rumoured retrofit I speak of, just heading back to that, should align with what the A330neo will offer, but from an operations standpoint, well, the Virgin Atlantic CEO has highlighted the need for serious upgrades to London Heathrow. As the company continues to grow, greater attention must be paid to really the experience from the moment you enter the airport to the moment you board the plane, not just the onboard experience, because if the prior completely falls apart, you're already setting the tone for a bad customer experience. And Virgin Atlantic believes Heathrow needs to rise to the occasion with greater attention to the likes of security upgrades and much more to make sure that the experience is seamless. More and more routes will also be on the cards for Virgin Atlantic as more aircraft arrive and we see pressures eased on existing units. One of the more noteworthy additions to the network has been Toronto, Canada, which was recently announced. But there is an interest in deploying jets to more Asian ports in time. This this likely a focus in the medium term. But things like regulator approval, aircraft being made available, obviously conflict in the regions that the plane would normally be overflying are all important considerations that can push back eventual launch plans. And we've certainly seen curveballs thrown in flying from Europe towards Asia in the last few years. I'm looking specifically at conflict in and around Ukraine, Russia, Israel, and neighboring places. But really, the goal is to continue to solidify that network, look at offering something different from the competition. This will be a necessary avenue, but also on the routes that Virgin Atlantic are present in, make sure they have a very competitive offering that will push people to fly them over someone else. Virgin Atlantic has also set key emission targets to net zero by 2050, but there are more ambitious targets than just that. In 2026, they hope to see a 15% gross reduction in CO2 through the rapid adjustment of their fleet. This will trickle down to 2030 when we should see a 15% reduction thanks to the implementation of sustainable aviation fuel. This an avenue that Virgin Atlantic has been advocating for. You'd argue it's one of the front runners with regards to the adoption of SAF, but there are still a lot of people that remain skeptical whether or not the airline will be able to actually achieve its carbon targets outlined in the timeframe provided. However, really what creeps into the equation of everything I'm discussing is the fleet and transformation efforts. Obviously, you wouldn't have an airline without aircraft, but for this UK company, there's just such a big emphasis on having one of the youngest fleets around and really using this as a core part of their immediate future. Because not only is it going to enable future growth to their network, it's going to lower the average age, lower costs, improve and help them reach emission targets, and so much more, from the ability to offer really next-gen technologies inside the aircraft when it comes to boarding and everything else in between. In fact, you'd argue that Virgin Atlantic is probably one of the few airlines that has put such an emphasis on the fleet, allowing to make everything possible. And I know that might sound a little bit silly, back to what I was saying, all airlines need aircraft, but the emphasis on that as part of the future is certainly different, as most companies can be found in different stages of their life cycle. There's also a focus on the airport experience, which doesn't necessarily wholly relate to aircraft. You want to try and enrich the experience for every type of traveller, especially upper class, and streamlining that process. When looking towards Heathrow, Virgin Atlantic doesn't believe it's up to the standard of some of your emerging and recently refurbished ones. The thing to also remember is airport refurbishments are not overnight jobs. Take a look at the chaos seen at New York JFK. So it is going to take some time, but I'll be keeping a close eye. You can let me know your thoughts on the future of Virgin Atlantic down below in the comments. Thanks for your support, and I'll see you next time for your latest industry analysis. And we'll fly.